The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between the stars. It was bigger than most cities on Earth, with towers that stretched out like metal arms reaching into space. Lights blinked along its surface, and ships moved in and out like busy insects around a hive. This was the home of the Galactic Council, where leaders from across the galaxy came to make decisions that affected billions of lives. Inside the station's main diplomatic wing, Ambassador Kelvin stood before a large window, watching the stars. He was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. His people, the Zephyrians, had been part of the council for over 300 years. They were known for being calm and thoughtful, never making quick decisions, or letting emotions guide their actions. Today was different, though. Today, Kelvin felt nervous. He turned away from the window and looked at the data pad in his long, slender hands. The information on the screen made him frown. In just a few hours, he would meet with representatives from a new species that had recently joined the galactic community. They called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue and green planet they named Earth. The humans had passed all the usual tests. They had developed faster-than-light travel on their own. They had shown they could work together as a species, even though they came from many different countries and cultures. They had proven they were not a threat to other worlds. By all the standard measures, they were ready to join the council. But there was something about humans that made the other species nervous. Something that had led to the creation of Rule 847 in the council's lawbooks. The rule was simple. All communications with human representatives must include a minimum 30-second delay. Live transmissions are forbidden during official meetings. Kelvin had read the rule many times, but he had never been told why it existed. The reasons were classified at the highest levels of council security. Only a few beings in the entire galaxy knew the truth, and they were not talking. On the other side of the station, Council Security Chief Vorthik paced back and forth in his office. He was an Exarian, a species that looked like walking tanks covered in thick gray armor. His people were known for being practical and direct, which made them good at keeping order and solving problems. Right now, though, Vorthik felt like he had a very big problem. He stopped pacing and looked at the security screens that covered one wall of his office. Each screen showed a different part of the station, and he could see his guards moving through the corridors, checking every system, every door, every piece of equipment that might be used during the meeting with the humans. Vorthik had been security chief for 15 years, but he was one of the few beings who remembered the last time humans had spoken directly to council members without a delay. The memory still made him feel cold inside. A soft chime sounded, and his assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Chief, the human ship has arrived. They are requesting permission to dock." Vorthik took a deep breath. "Grant permission. Dock them at Bay 7, as planned. Make sure all communication systems are set to the standard delay. And remind all personnel about the protocols." "Yes, Chief." Vorthik turned back to his screens and watched as a sleek ship moved toward the station. The human vessel was called the UES Liberty, and it was smaller than most diplomatic ships. It had clean lines and a simple design that somehow managed to look both peaceful and powerful at the same time. Inside the Liberty, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching Nexus Prime grow larger through the main view screen. Jake was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had served in Earth's Space Navy for 25 years, and he had been chosen to lead this mission because he was good at talking to people and making them feel comfortable. "It's beautiful," said Dr. Lisa Park, who was standing next to him. Lisa was a scientist who studied alien life and cultures. She was shorter than Jake, with dark hair and bright, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. "I've seen pictures. but being here in person is completely different. Agreed, said Commander Ryan Bell from his position at the tactical station. Ryan was younger than the other two, with short brown hair and the kind of steady presence that made people trust him. He had been a soldier before becoming a diplomat, and he still carried himself like someone who was ready for trouble. Jake nodded as he watched the alien station. Remember, everyone, this is just a standard diplomatic meeting. We introduce ourselves, we talk about trade and cooperation, and we go home. Nice and simple. But even as he said the words, Jake felt like something was not quite right. During their journey to Nexus Prime, they had tried to establish direct communication with the station several times. Each time, they were told that all communications would need to go through a special system that added a 30-second delay to every message. When Jake had asked why, the aliens had given him a standard response about ensuring proper translation protocols. It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way they said it made Jake think there was more to the story. Lisa had noticed it too. "Admiral," she said quietly, "have you ever heard of any other species requiring communication delays?" "For diplomatic meetings? No," Jake replied. "In fact, most species prefer direct communication. It builds trust." Ryan looked up from his station. "Sir, I've been reading through the diplomatic files. There are a lot of gaps in the information about human-alien contact. Almost like someone removed parts of the records." Before Jake could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A voice spoke in careful, measured tones. UES. "Liberty, this is Nexus Prime Control. You are cleared for docking at Bay 7. Please maintain standard communication protocols during your visit. Welcome to the galactic community." The voice was friendly enough, but there was something in it that Jake could not quite identify. It sounded almost like Fear Dot as the Liberty moved toward its docking bay. None of the humans on board realized that they were about to become part of the most dangerous diplomatic meeting in galactic history. They had no idea that their simple, natural way of speaking had once caused revolutions across the stars. They were just humans after all. And that, as the galaxy had learned long ago, was exactly the problem. The ceremony hall was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up so high it seemed to disappear into darkness. Hundreds of beings from dozens of different worlds sat in curved rows of seats that formed a perfect circle around a central platform. The air hummed with the sound of translation devices working in many different languages. Admiral Jake Morrison walked beside Ambassador Kell, then toward the center of the hall. Behind them came Dr. Lisa Park and Commander Ryan Bell, both trying not to stare too obviously at the incredible variety of alien life forms around them. There were beings that looked like walking trees with golden bark and leaves that changed color as they moved. Others appeared to be made of living crystal, their bodies catching and reflecting the light in beautiful patterns. Some were covered in thick fur and had multiple arms, while others seemed to float in the air without any visible means of support. "Your species shows remarkable diversity," Jake said to Kelvin as they walked. But instead of hearing Jake's words immediately, Kelvin had to wait 30 seconds for the translation system to process and deliver the message. Kelvin nodded politely after the delay. "We are honored by your presence, Admiral Morrison. The Council looks forward to learning about human culture and discussing future cooperation." The formal words felt strange and empty compared to Jake's natural comment. Lisa noticed the difference too. She was used to conversations that flowed naturally, where people could interrupt each other, ask quick questions, or share sudden thoughts. This system of forced delays made everything feel artificial. They reached the center platform, and Calvin began the opening ceremony. He spoke about the importance of unity among the stars, the value of peaceful cooperation, and the joy of welcoming a new species to the galactic community. His words were translated into dozens of languages and broadcast throughout the hall. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he stepped forward and smiled at the assembled beings. "Thank you for this warm welcome," he began. "We humans are excited to be here and to learn from all of you. We hope we can contribute something valuable to this great community." His words went into the translation system and would be delivered to the aliens after the standard 30-second delay. But then something went wrong. Deep in the station's technical levels, a power coupling that had been installed over 50 years ago finally reached the end of its useful life. It sparked once, twice, and then failed completely. The failure was small, affecting only a minor circuit in the translation matrix, but it had a big effect. For exactly 47 seconds, the communication delay system stopped working. Lisa, who had been watching the beautiful crystal beings in the front row, spoke without thinking. "This place is absolutely amazing," she said, her voice full of genuine wonder. "How do you create something so beautiful and graceful? I mean, the way these arches curve and the light plays through them. It's like living art." Her words reached the aliens instantly, without any delay. The effect was immediate and shocking. The crystal beings, who called themselves the Luminar Collective, had not heard such genuine appreciation in over 200 years. In their culture, beauty was measured by precise mathematical formulas, and art was created by committees to meet specific functional requirements. But Lisa's words carried something they had almost forgotten: pure, emotional response to beauty for its own sake. One of the Luminar began to glow brighter, his crystal body pulsing with colors that had no names. He turned to his neighbor and said something in their musical language. Within seconds, other Luminar were responding, their bodies flickering with lights as they spoke faster and faster. At the same time, 3 different species in the upper sections began arguing loudly about who deserved credit for the station's design. The builders claimed they had done all the structural work. The designers insisted that beauty came from their artistic vision. The engineers declared that without their technical knowledge, nothing would function properly. Ryan, seeing the tension rising in the room, tried to help by using humor the way humans always did. "Hey, this reminds me of home," he said with a grin. "Humans always argue about who makes the best coffee. We've got people who swear by beans from different mountains, different roasting methods, different ways of brewing. But you know what? In the end, we all just want something warm and good to start our day." His casual, self-deprecating comment hit the Thraxian delegation like a lightning bolt. The Thraxians were a serious species that never laughed, never showed weakness, and never admitted that their way might not be the only right way. But Ryan's easy admission that humans could disagree about something as simple as coffee and still get along was completely alien to them. The chief Thraxian delegate made a sound that no one in the hall had ever heard before. It started as a low rumble in his throat and grew into something that could only be called laughter. Soon, other Thraxians were making the same sound, and their rigid formation began to break apart as they turned to talk to each other instead of staring straight. Ahead, Jake, realizing that something unusual was happening, but not understanding what, tried to calm things down. "I hope we haven't caused any offense," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "We humans believe that diversity makes us stronger. When we look at all of you, we see not just different species, but different ways of thinking, different solutions to problems, different kinds of wisdom. That's incredibly valuable." His words, spoken with the kind of genuine respect that humans showed when they truly meant what they said, reached Ambassador Cal thin without any delay. For the first time in his 300-year life, Calthan felt something he had no name for. It was like a warmth spreading through his chest, a sense of being truly understood and valued not for his position or his species power, but for himself. Calthan staggered slightly, overwhelmed by the sensation. Around the hall, other beings were having similar reactions. The rigid hierarchies that governed their societies, the careful protocols that determined who could speak and when, the ancient rules about knowing one's place, all of it suddenly seemed less important than this new feeling of connection. The technical team, monitoring from their control room, saw their instruments going wild. "Power surge in Sector 7, one technician called out. "Translation matrix is showing massive overload. Get it back online," shouted the chief engineer. "Now!" They worked frantically, rerouting power and resetting systems. After exactly 47 seconds, the delay function came back online. But those 47 seconds had changed everything. In the ceremony hall, Jake noticed that the aliens around them looked different somehow. Their postures were less rigid, their movements more natural. Many of them were talking quietly among themselves instead of sitting in perfect silence. "Is everything all right?" Lisa asked Kelvin, but now her words took 30 seconds to reach him. When the delayed translation finally came through, Calvin blinked as if waking from a dream. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Everything is fine." But his voice carried uncertainty, and several other ambassadors were looking at each other with expressions that their species had not worn in centuries. Something had awakened in that brief moment of direct communication, something that the galactic powers had worked very hard to keep sleeping in his security office. Vorthik watched the scene through his monitors and felt his armored skin go cold. He had seen those expressions before, long ago. He knew what they meant. The humans had done it again. Emergency protocols would need to be activated. Council sessions would need to be called. And somewhere in the classified archives, old files would need to be pulled out and read once more. 47-second malfunction was over, but its effects were just beginning to spread through the galaxy like ripples in a pond. And at the center of it all were 3 humans who had no idea that their simple, natural way of speaking was the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever encountered. The Council archives were located in the deepest part of Nexus Prime, behind walls of metal so thick that they could survive the explosion of a star. Most beings who worked on the station had never seen this place, and fewer still had permission. To enter the restricted sections where the most dangerous information in the galaxy was stored. Admiral Jake Morrison, Dr. Lisa Park, and Commander Ryan Bell followed Council Archivist Mordu through corridors lined with data storage units that hummed with quiet energy. Mordu was ancient, even by the standards of his long-lived species. His body was covered in scales that had turned silver with age, and his movements were slow and careful. "What you are about to learn," Mordu said in his dry, whispered voice, "must never be shared with your government or your people. The information I will show you is classified at the highest levels of council security. Do you understand?" "We understand," Jake replied, though he was not sure he really did. The events in the ceremony hall had been confusing enough, but the reaction of the council leadership had been even stranger. Within hours of the communication system malfunction, Jake and his team had been asked to attend an emergency meeting with the archivist. They reached a heavy door, marked with symbols in a dozen different languages. All of them said the same thing: "Authorized personnel only." Mordu placed his hand on a scanner, and the door slid open with a deep rumble. Inside was a room filled with display screens and storage devices. The walls were covered with charts and graphs showing the rise and fall of civilizations across thousands of years. But what caught Jake's attention was a large screen in the center of the room, showing the image of a human starship. "The U.S. Endeavor," Mordu said, noticing Jake's stare. "Perhaps you recognize it?" Jake nodded slowly. "It was one of our first deep space exploration vessels. It disappeared about 70 years ago during a mission to the Outer Rim. We always assumed it was destroyed by an equipment failure or space pirates. It was not destroyed, Mordu said. It made first contact with the hegemony patrol ship Eternal Vigilance on stardate 2287.156. What happened next nearly destroyed our civilization. The old archivist moved to a control panel and began calling up files. Images appeared on the screens around the room. Star charts, ship records, and most importantly, communication logs from that first meeting between humans and the galactic community. The initial contact was supposed to be simple, Mordu continued. A brief exchange of basic information, verification that both species were peaceful, and then a scheduled meeting to discuss formal first contact procedures. The entire process should have taken no more than 30 minutes. How long did it actually take? Lisa asked. 6 hours and 43 minutes, Mordu replied. And by the time it was over, the hegemony's 1,000-year empire was in ruins. The screens now showed the crew of the Endeavor. Jake recognized the faces from history books. Captain Emma Stone, a decorated explorer known for her curiosity and courage. Engineer Tony Martinez, who had designed many of the systems that made human space travel possible. And communications. Officer Kate Sullivan, who spoke 7 Earth languages and had been chosen for her ability to talk to anyone. Captain Stone and her crew were everything we have come to expect from humans, Mordu said. Curious, friendly, and completely unaware of the effect their words would have on other species. He activated an audio file, and the room filled with voices from 70 years ago. The translation was clear, and Jake could hear Captain Stone speaking with the hegemony ship's commander. "Your ship is beautiful," Captain Stone was saying. "The engineering must be incredible. How long did it take to build something like that?" The hegemony commander's response came after a long pause. "The construction of imperial vessels is... That is, it is not customary to discuss such matters with..." Another pause. "Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious," Captain Stone replied, and Jake could hear the smile in her voice. "On Earth, we love to learn how things work. Tony here, he's our engineer. He's probably dying to know about your engine design. And Kate, she's fascinated by languages. She'd love to know how your translation systems work." What followed was a conversation unlike anything in galactic history. The humans asked questions not because they wanted to steal technology or gain advantage, but simply because they were interested. They shared stories about their own ships and their own worlds, not to boast, but because they enjoyed talking. With new people, most importantly, they treated the hegemony crew as equals, not as superior beings to be feared or inferior ones to be controlled. The effect on the hegemony crew was immediate, Mordu explained. For the first time in their lives, they were speaking with beings who valued their thoughts and opinions, not just their obedience to the Empire. The audio continued, and Jake heard Tony Martinez explaining how human engines worked. "The beautiful thing about our design," Tony was saying, "is that any engineer can understand it and improve it. We share all our technical knowledge freely, because we believe that when everyone knows more, everyone benefits." The hegemony engineer's response was barely a whisper. You share your knowledge without requiring payment or service." "Of course," Tony replied, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Knowledge belongs to everyone." That single statement, Mordu said, began the great rebellion that tore the hegemony apart. Within days, engineers across 17 star systems were refusing to keep their knowledge secret. Within weeks, they were teaching forbidden sciences to anyone who wanted to learn. More files appeared on the screens, showing the chaos that followed. The hegemony's power had been based on keeping different groups of people from communicating with each other and sharing knowledge. When that system broke down, the empire collapsed in a matter of months. It was not the only incident, Mordu continued. Over the next 50 years, every time humans made direct contact with other species, the same thing happened. They would speak naturally, without understanding the effect of their words, and entire civilizations would change. He showed them records of the crystalline collective's great awakening, triggered when human diplomat Peter Johnson made an offhand comment about the beauty of individual thought. The collective had been a species that shared all thoughts and feelings, with no concept of personal identity. Peter's casual suggestion that maybe having different opinions wasn't such a bad thing led to the first individual personalities in their history. There were files on the hive mind schism, caused when Dr. Amy Foster suggested that disagreement could lead to better solutions. The Trade Federation's economic collapse followed human economist Chris Davis's observation that maybe a person's worth shouldn't be measured only by their wealth. Each incident followed the same pattern, Mordu explained. Humans would speak with genuine warmth, curiosity, and respect. They would treat other beings as individuals worthy of dignity and freedom. And the beings who heard them would begin to question everything they had been taught about hierarchy, obedience, and the natural order of things. Lisa stared at the files in amazement. "We had no idea," she said softly. "We were just being ourselves." "That," Mordu replied, "is exactly what makes you so dangerous. You do not realize the power of your words, because to you, treating others with respect and dignity is natural. But to species that have lived for thousands of years under rigid systems of control, your casual assumptions about freedom and equality are like explosives." Ryan looked at the star charts showing the affected systems. "So the Council created the communication delay to protect themselves from us?" "To protect the stability of galactic civilization," Mordu corrected. "The revolutions caused by human contact led to wars, economic collapse, and the deaths of billions. The Council had to choose between banning humans from the galaxy entirely or finding a way to limit their influence. The delay system was a compromise," he continued. "It allows formal diplomatic contact while preventing the kind of natural, spontaneous conversation that causes these ... transformations." Jake felt a mixture of pride and horror as he looked at the evidence spread across the screens. Humanity's greatest strength, their natural tendency toward freedom and equality, had become their most feared characteristic in the eyes of the galaxy. "But the system isn't perfect," he said, thinking about what had happened in the ceremony. When that communication malfunction occurred today, ... Mordu nodded grimly. "The effects are already beginning. Several council members have called for emergency sessions. The Luminar Collective is experiencing unauthorized emotional responses. The Thraxian delegation has been seen laughing something that has not happened in their culture for over 800 years. He turned to face the humans directly. "Your 47 seconds of direct communication may have just started another revolution. And this time, it is happening at the very heart of galactic government." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the data storage systems. Jake, Lisa, and Ryan stood surrounded by the evidence of humanity's unintentional power, understanding for the first time why they were both welcomed and feared among the stars. They were not conquerors or warriors. They were something far more dangerous. They were free people who believed that everyone deserved to be free. And in a galaxy built on control and hierarchy, that simple be. 3 days had passed since the communication malfunction, and the effects were spreading faster than anyone had expected. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in his quarters aboard the UES Liberty, looking out at the lights of Nexus Prime. Through the Yaz window, he could see unusual activity. Ships arriving and departing at all hours, security patrols moving in groups, and communication arrays working overtime. Dr. Lisa Park entered the room carrying a datapad filled with reports from their far alien hosts. "Jake, you need to see this," she said, her voice filled with concern and excitement. "The situation is getting bigger." "How much bigger?" Jake asked. Try 17 star systems and counting, Lisa replied. The Luminar Collective has split in two. Individual consciousness for the first time in their history. 3 hegemony worlds had declared independence. The Thraxian military is experiencing something they're calling voluntary service. Soldiers are choosing their assignments instead of following orders blindly. Before Jake could respond, Commander Ryan Bell's voice came through the communication system. Admiral, we have a situation. Ambassador Kelthan is requesting an emergency meeting. He says it's about tonight's cultural exchange dinner. Jake sighed. The cultural exchange had been planned as a simple meal where humans and aliens could share food and stories from their home worlds. It was supposed to be an informal, relaxed event, exactly the kind of thing that the Council's communication protocols were designed to prevent. Tell him we'll be right there, Jake said. They found Kelthan in the diplomatic meeting room, pacing back and forth with an expression of worry on his blue-gray face. Several other council members were with him, including Security Chief Vorthak, who looked like he had not slept in days. Admiral Morrison. Kelthan began without the usual formal greetings. We have a problem. The cultural exchange dinner cannot proceed as planned. Why not? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The communication delay system, Vorthak said bluntly. It has been experiencing more malfunctions. Our technical teams cannot guarantee that it will remain stable during an informal gathering. The risk of extended direct communication is too great. Lisa looked confused. I don't understand. What's so dangerous about sharing a meal and telling stories? The aliens exchanged glances, and Jake realized that they were all afraid. Not just concerned or worried, genuinely afraid of spending an evening in casual conversation with humans. Perhaps, Jake said carefully, we could help if we understood the specific risks. What exactly do you think might happen? Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed, and an automated voice announced, technical malfunction in Sector 12. Communication systems offline. Repair teams respond immediately. Vorthak grabbed his communication device and barked orders to his security teams. But as he spoke, his device sparked and went dead. Similar failures were happening all around the room as the station's communication network collapsed. This is impossible, Kelthan muttered. These systems have backup power, triple redundancy, automatic repair protocols. Unless, Lisa said slowly, someone is sabotaging them on purpose. They all turned to look at her. What do you mean? Vorthak demanded. Think about it, Lisa continued. You have entire species that are starting to question their old ways of life. Beings who are beginning to experience individual thought and emotion for the first time. Do you really think they want to go back to the way things were? As if to prove her point, a young Luminar technician appeared at the door. His crystal body was glowing with colors that shifted rapidly as he spoke. Chief Vorthak, I regret to inform you that the communication delay systems in Sectors 7 through 15 have experienced simultaneous failures. My repair teams are ... unavailable. Unavailable? Vorthak roared. What does that mean? The technician's glow brightened. They are in the main cafeteria, sir, discussing philosophy with the Thraxian guards. They say they will return to work when they have finished exploring the concept of personal choice. Vorthak's armored face turned a darker shade of gray. The revolution was happening right under his nose, and his own security forces were joining it. Well, Jake said into the stunned silence, I guess we're having that dinner after all. 2 hours later, the main dining hall was filled with an impossible sight. Beings from dozens of different worlds sat together at tables, talking and laughing, without any communication delays. The formal seating arrangements had been abandoned, and instead, aliens were choosing where to sit based on who they wanted to talk with. Jake found himself at a table with 3 Thraxian warriors. a luminar artist, and two beings from species he did not recognize. The conversation flowed naturally as they shared stories about their home worlds. On Earth, we have a saying, Jake told them. Home is where the heart is. It means that the place you belong is not necessarily where you were born, but where you choose to be with the people you care about. One of the Thraxian warriors, a female named Zexandra, leaned forward with interest. Choose? She asked. In our culture, we are assigned to locations based on strategic necessity. Personal preference is not considered. But what if it was? Jake asked gently. What if you could serve wherever you felt you could do the most good? Zexandra was quiet for a moment, and Jake could see something changing in her expression. I have always wanted to serve on the border worlds, protecting colonies from pirates. But I was assigned to honor guard duty because of my family's rank. So why don't you ask for a transfer? Jake suggested. The question seemed to hit Zexandra like a physical blow. Ask? We do not ask. We accept our assignments. But you're a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams, Jake replied. Why shouldn't you have a say in your own life? At another table, Lisa was deep in conversation with a group of hegemony engineers about human scientific methods. The key to good science, she was explaining, is being willing to admit when you're wrong. Some of our greatest discoveries came from scientists who threw out old theories and started fresh. But what about the established knowledge? Asked one of the engineers. What about the teachings of the science masters? Lisa shrugged. Knowledge belongs to everyone, not just the people in charge. If a new idea is better than an old one, it doesn't matter who thought of it first. The engineers stared at her in amazement. In their society, challenging the established wisdom was forbidden, even if you had evidence that it was wrong. Across the room, Ryan was telling a group of mixed species about human military history. The greatest battles in human history, he sighed, were not won by the soldiers who followed orders without question. They were won by ordinary people who chose to fight for something they believed in. But without discipline and hierarchy, how do you maintain order? Asked an Exarian general. We do have discipline, Ryan replied, but it comes from within, from personal responsibility and shared purpose. When people choose to work together toward a common goal, they fight harder and more effectively than when they're forced to. As the evening continued, the conversations grew more intense and personal. Beings who had never questioned their place in society were suddenly imagining different possibilities for their lives. Species that had lived under rigid control for thousands of years were discussing concepts like personal freedom, individual choice, and democratic government. Ambassador Kelvin sat at the head table, watching the unprecedented scene with a mixture of fascination and terror. Beside him, Council Archivist Mordu was taking notes as fast as his ancient hands could move. It's happening again, Mordu whispered, but this time it's different. This time they're not just rebelling against their old systems, they're actively choosing new ones. Kelvin nodded slowly. Around the room, he could see the future taking shape. The rigid hierarchies that had maintained order in the galaxy for millennia were crumbling, but something new was being built in their place. Something based on choice, cooperation, and mutual respect. Near the end of the evening, a young luminar stood up and addressed the room. His crystal body pulsed with steady, confident light as he spoke. For the first time in my life, he said, I understand what it means to be an individual, not just part of a collective, but a unique being with my own thoughts and dreams. And I choose to be free. The room erupted in cheers from a dozen different species. Beings who had never made a personal choice in their lives were suddenly declaring their independence from systems of control that had seemed eternal. Just days before, Jake looked around the room and realized that they had just witnessed the birth of a new galactic order. not through war or conquest, but through the simple power of human conversation. The radical idea that every being deserved dignity, freedom, and the right to choose their own path. The revolution had begun, and it was unstoppable. Outside in. Space. Ships from dozens of worlds were already changing course, carrying news of the transformation back to their home systems. Within days, the effects would spread across the galaxy like wildfire, bringing the greatest change in galactic history. At the center of it all were three humans who had simply been themselves, curious, friendly, and free. 6 months had passed since the cultural exchange dinner that changed the galaxy. Admiral Jake Morrison stood once again in the great assembly hall of Nexus Prime. But everything was different now. The rigid rows of seats had been replaced with a circular arrangement where no species sat higher than another. The formal podium at the center had been removed, and instead there was an open floor where anyone could speak. Most importantly, there were no communication delays. Voices mixed freely in the air as beings from hundreds of worlds debated, discussed, and decided the future of galactic civilization together. Jake watched as Ambassador Kelvin, now calling himself simply Kale, addressed the assembly. The formal titles and rigid protocols had been abandoned months ago, replaced by something that looked remarkably like democracy. The motion before us today, Kale said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, is whether to accept the application from the Outer Rim colonies for representation in this assembly. Under our old system, this would have been decided by a committee of senior council members meeting in private. Today, we will hear from everyone who wishes to speak, and then we will vote. A young Thraxian female stood up. Jake recognized her as Zexandra, the warrior who had asked about choosing her own assignment during that first dinner. She was now the elected representative of the Thraxian reform movement. I support this motion, she said clearly. The Outer Rim colonies have shown they can govern themselves peacefully and fairly. They have chosen to organize their society around individual freedom and collective responsibility, the same principles we are learning to follow here. An older hegemony male rose from his seat. But what about security concerns? The Outer Rim has always been unstable, full of pirates and rebels. Perhaps, suggested Dr. Lisa Park from the human section, they were only unstable because they were never given a voice in their own governance. People who have no say in the laws that govern them often turn to rebellion. The hegemony representative considered this for a moment. That ... that is a possibility I had not considered. In my experience, order comes from strong central control. But I have seen how these new democratic systems work in other sectors. Crime rates have actually decreased when people feel they have legitimate ways to address their grievances. The discussion continued for over an hour, with representatives from dozens of species sharing their thoughts and experiences. Jake marveled at how natural it seemed now. These beings who had once communicated only through formal channels and rigid protocols were debating like old friends, disagreeing respectfully and working together to find solutions. Commander Ryan Bell, who now served as Earth's military liaison to the new Galactic Defense Force, stood to address security concerns. The Outer Rim colonies have already volunteered to contribute ships and personnel to our joint defense fleet. They're not asking for protection without offering to help protect others in return. The debate was passionate but civil. When disagreements arose, they were settled through discussion and compromise rather than appeals to authority or ancient law. It was messy and sometimes loud, but it was also alive in a way the old council had never been. Finally, Kale called for the vote. All in favor of accepting the Outer Rim colonies as full members of this assembly, please indicate. Lights appeared throughout the hall as beings activated their voting devices. The count appeared on screens visible to everyone. 847 in favor, 124 opposed, 67 abstaining. The motion passes. Cale announced, and the hall erupted in cheers from multiple species. Jake smiled as he watched the celebration. The transformation had not been easy or simple. There had been conflicts as old systems broke down and new ones took their place. Some species had struggled more than others to adapt to concepts of individual freedom and democratic government. A few had even tried to return to their old ways, but the change had been unstoppable. Once beings experienced the freedom to make their own choices, to speak their own thoughts, and to participate in decisions that affected their lives, they refused to give it up. The revolution had spread to over 200 star systems now. Entire sectors of the galaxy had reorganized themselves around principles of freedom, equality, and representative government. Trade had increased as artificial barriers came down. Scientific progress had accelerated as knowledge was shared freely, instead of being hoarded by ruling classes. Most remarkably, conflicts between species had decreased dramatically. When beings saw each other as individuals with rights and dignity, rather than as representatives of alien hierarchies, they found it much easier to resolve disputes peacefully. After the assembly session ended, Jake found himself in the station's main cafeteria with Lisa and Ryan. They sat at a table with beings from half a dozen different worlds, sharing a meal and casual conversation, just as they had 6 months ago. "You know," Lisa said, taking a bite of something that looked like blue fruit but tasted like chocolate, "I keep thinking about what Mordu told us in the archives, about how dangerous our way of speaking was supposed to be." "It was dangerous," replied Zexandra, who had joined their table. "Dangerous to systems built on oppression and control. But we have learned that some things need to be destroyed so that better things can be built." A luminar artist named Brightsong pulsed with gentle colors as he spoke. "In my culture, we used to believe that change was chaos, that stability came only from everyone thinking the same thoughts. Now I understand that real stability comes from everyone having the freedom to think different thoughts and then choosing to work together anyway." Ryan nodded. "On Earth, we have a saying, 'United we stand, divided we fall.' But we learned that you can't have real unity by forcing everyone to be the same. True unity comes when different people choose to stand together, despite their differences." Jake looked around the table at faces that represented dozens of different evolutionary paths, different homeworlds, different cultures, and histories. Yet they were all here by choice, working together to build something better than what had come before. "I have a confession to make," Jake said. "When we first came here, I thought our job was just to introduce humanity to galactic civilization. I never imagined we would end up changing that civilization completely." "You didn't change it," Cale said, approaching their table with a smile, an expression that would have been impossible for his people just months ago. "You simply showed us that change was possible. We did the changing ourselves." "But why?" Lisa asked. "Why did our way of speaking have such a powerful effect? Other species must have encountered democracy and individual freedom before." "They had," Cale replied, settling into a chair beside them. "But it was always presented as a system, a set of rules and procedures. You presented it as a way of being. When you spoke to us, you didn't lecture about the theory of equality. You simply treated us as equals. You didn't explain the concept of individual worth. You acted as if our individual thoughts and feelings mattered." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Most species learn about freedom by reading about it or hearing speeches about it. We learned about freedom by experiencing it in conversation with you. And once we felt what it was like to be truly heard and respected as individuals, we could never go back to being just parts of a hierarchy." An announcement came over the station's communication system. "Attention all residents and visitors. The ceremony for the signing of the new Galactic Charter will begin in 1 hour in Assembly Hall Alpha. All beings are welcome to attend." Jake felt a surge of pride and amazement. The new Galactic Charter was based on principles that humans had taken for granted: individual rights, democratic representation, freedom of speech and thought, equality under law. But for most of the galaxy, these were revolutionary concepts that were being written into law for the first time. As they made their way to the ceremony, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They had come as ambassadors from a small planet, hoping to find their place in a vast galactic community. Instead, they had helped create an entirely new kind of community, one built on freedom rather than control. The ceremony hall was packed with beings from across the galaxy. There were no assigned seats, no hierarchy of importance. Everyone who wanted to witness this historic moment was welcome. The charter itself was a simple document, written in clear language that any being could understand. It established basic rights that applied to all sapient species: the right to think freely, to speak without fear, to participate in the decisions that affected their lives, and to pursue happiness in their own way. As Kale signed the charter on behalf of the assembly, he looked out at the crowd of free beings and smiled. Today we establish not just a new government, but a new way of living together among the stars. We choose cooperation over domination, freedom over control, and hope over fear. The applause that followed came from hundreds of different species, creating a sound unlike anything in galactic history. It was the sound of unity chosen freely, of diversity celebrated rather than suppressed. Later that evening, Jake stood once again at the window of his quarters, looking out at the stars. But now those stars represented something different, not distant lights in the darkness, but homes to billions of beings who were discovering what it meant to be free. Lisa and Ryan joined him at the window,